refuge in the highest Buddha, refuge in the immaculate Dharma, refuge in the harmonious Sangha. Namu Gye Buddha, Namu Gye Ho, Namu Gye Zo. What we endeavor to study and practice together is intimate, meaning it's very close. We never separate from it. And so it can be difficult to gain perspective. And so we practice in many different ways. Silently sitting, chanting, and studying the Dharma. These are formal ways that we study the way. But we also study the way through all of the activities of our daily life. We study the way through the way in which we take refuge in each other, and we trust in each other's experience. We trust in each other's heart of the way. And so, as we practice during this practice period, this fall practice period, we've been in the practice period for about 3 weeks now. And so, it's my hope that everyone's daily practice is staying consistent. For those of you who are term students, I think most of the people here are. But more than just the consistency of your practice in terms of are you sitting zazen or not sitting zazen or chanting or those kinds of things, the consistency of this eye for the intimate, or the eye that is inquiring into what is intimate in my life, in practice. What is prajna? If we ask what is prajna, we have to also ask what is karuna, or what is compassion, because the two always act together. And so as we're practicing together, there should be questions that are emerging. It's hard to say when a question will grab you, but it's a real art to learn to feel for how it is that a question emerges in your heart and your mind and your body, and how you can pay attention to it in the proper way. What I mean by proper here is that you can pay attention to it as something valuable, not as just a problem to be solved, but as a gateway into further steps of exploration. And so in our tradition, asking questions is the most ancient. If you go back to reading the sutras, almost all of the sutras start with a question by someone, by one of the followers of the Buddha, sometimes by his critics or other people in the society, but mostly by the people who are endeavoring to follow his teachings. In the asking the question itself, there is a great teaching, a necessary part of the spiritual path. And the response that comes sometimes from the Buddha, sometimes from one of the Buddha's followers who's there and speaks on the Buddha's behalf. This is where all of the Dharma extends from. And so it is my hope that in these meetings, these question and response meetings, that we have a chance to talk about this intimate heart, not in a very formal way like we do in Shosan, but not in such an informal way where we're kind of explaining a lot of things, where we're just trying to get down to that intimate heart, that center of the matter, the heart of the matter. What is it about? And to come forward with a question, and for me to be able to respond to that, and to see where it goes, without looking for closure, but looking for what is the next step that we can take in our inquiry. That's the kind of spirit that I hope we can encounter these sessions together in. So last week, the teisho that I gave was focused on prajna paramita, and I'd asked term students to do some reflection about that, so perhaps you have some questions that came out of that, but you may also have questions that come from other places, so please feel free to bring them forward and illuminate the assembly.
Hey, Joe.
I
I have a lot of trouble with the word that's very often translated as life is suffering when you look up Buddhism. And there's another there's another translation, life is dissatisfaction. But I find that in my life, there are moments of joy they may not last, but once I accept that good and bad come together. How would you translate that word? How would you express that?
Yeah. I prefer to use the word dukkha, and for us in a lexicon that has not really accepted that word yet, to help bring that word into our lexicon. So sometimes I'll use the word suffering, sometimes the word unsatisfactory. I particularly don't like the translation stressful. That doesn't ring very true to me. Unsatisfactory, I think maybe I said that. So these all get at it. But for us to understand the technical definition of dukkha is also important. So the Buddha said that there's 3 levels to dukkha. The first level of dukkha is our garden variety type suffering. So anything that people would generally call difficult, would call painful, would call sorrowful. That is referred to as dukkha. It's the opposite of sukha, which means pleasurable or joyful. So on that level, dukkha is just the pain that we feel. And we know it. We just know it as pain. Physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain, psychic pain. Just that raw difficulty. But the Buddha said there are 2 more layers of pain, or 2 more layers of dukkha. The second level of dukkha is that even things that are pleasurable also they don't last. And so in that level, dukkha is not opposed to sukha, but dukkha and sukha are both dukkha in the sense that they don't have a permanence. They can't satisfy us in the way that our grasping heart wants to be satisfied. So that's really important. They can't satisfy us in the way that our grasping heart wants to be satisfied. They can't respond to that longing for a permanent, unending joy. or pleasure. And so on that level, there is dukkha, because it will go away. And then on the third level, dukkha refers to the fact that things are not, they are conditioned. They are not just impermanent in time, but the thing itself is not what we think it is. So as we grab onto it, it's not that we grab onto it and it's wonderful and it fulfills our desire and then it goes away. But even just the grabbing onto it, we already know that it's not going to fulfill my deep desire because it is conditioned. So these layers exist as a shallower and deeper understanding of dukkha. So for us to study all of those levels is really important. And one of the reasons it's important is because as we study the deeper levels of dukkha, dukkha and nirvana are not separate at all. The very same quality of being which gives rise to dukkha also gives rise to nirvana. The difference is the grasping heart or the heart of relinquishment. That's the difference. And so the grasping heart as it experiences dukkha teaches us about relinquishment. And as we embody and enact relinquishment, the exact same situation, the exact same conditions of dukkha now are experienced as nirvana. And it couldn't be otherwise. If something were to respond to your grasping idea of a permanent solution, you'd be wrecked. You couldn't actually find nirvana. You'd be stuck. You'd be stuck in that grasping. But nothing will respond that way. Nothing will give you the object to the subject that wants that total fulfillment. No object can do it. And that's their compassion, actually. The compassion of all the objects of our perception. Their great compassion is that they won't correspond to our grasping. They will give us dukkha so that we can find nirvana.
Andrew?
Hi.
I'm going to feel a little redundant here, like I'm almost just asking you to expand on what you just said, but the question I wanted to ask is, what is the difference between relying on prajna paramita and chasing after it as some kind of graspable permanent solution?
Yeah. In the Heart Sutra, there's one translation where it says, Avalokitasvara bodhisattva, while deeply coursing in prajna paramita, clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. I really like that translation. We don't use that one because it's not the standard translation, and that's what we use here, the standard Soto Shu translations. But if we think about that word practice, we think about that word coursing in, this isn't grasping. This is actually the opposite. To practice prajna, we have to practice relinquishment. And in practicing relinquishment, being willing to encounter the deep and profound darkness, the place where things cannot be seen, they can't be grasped, they can't be enumerated. It's from that deep well that there is an unbinding. So that's not easy, In fact, maybe that's what practice is about, is learning the difference between chasing after our idea of prajna and actually practicing prajna. So that's why Dogen Zenji was so unrelenting in his insistence that practice and awakening are never separated. Right? We think like, if I do the right practices, then I'll be awakened, and then I don't have to practice. Or that the awakening will happen apart from the practice, or as a result of the practice. But Dogen Zenji very strongly emphasized that these two things are inseparable. That our practice has to be a practice of awakening. And awakening is not just a state. Awakening is the activity of the bodhisattva, of a bodhi mind. So we're always trying to clarify, am I just pretending to sit zazen? Do I know what it is? I have a firm idea, and so now, okay, here I am, I'm practicing it. Or am I waking up? We can go to sleep on the cushion very easily. As easily, if not more easily, than taking care of business.
Hello. I'd like to explore a little more around the opening line in the Heart Sutra, and explore what the 5 aggregates are.
So the 5 aggregates are one of the oldest ways to talk about the way that a being is, what is a being, and so it becomes a representative of the rest of the sutra, where the sutra is teaching us that there is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no sight, no sound, no smell, and all those no's. All of those no's are an expression of emptiness, and so the formations are the first set that get presented, right, in the sutra. And so when we think about what is it that comprises a being in this old way of thinking about it, it first talks about form. So in this case, the form would be like what we normally think of as our materiality, but it isn't only our materiality. It's like a phenomena, the shape of phenomena. So it doesn't have to be material; it can also be mental in a way, right? But it's that form. And then we say that because in the form we have the sense organ, and then we have a sense object, and we have sense consciousness, that then there will be some kind of sensation that emerges. So on that layer, there is an interaction of phenomena. And in that interaction of phenomena, there will be some kind of sensation. And then there will be some reaction to that sensation. There will be some aversion. There'll be some kind of attraction. There'll be some kind of neutrality. So that's another layer. And then there'll be the layer of formation, which is the one that Buddhism pays a very close attention to. and is also, sometimes we call karma. So is the habit energy of a being. What is the long river of causes and conditions that flow through the intention, right? Through mind as intention. That layer is known as formation. And then consciousness is the part of our being which can work with all of these levels to give us the experience of phenomena, the experience of self, the experience of other, etc. So you can study this really, there's lots to study in this about how they interrelate. And it's one of the oldest ways in which the Buddha taught us to explore no self, right? The core teaching of no self. That we aren't just a being, ta-da, right? That we are made up of these layers. And as we explore those layers more deeply, we understand what emptiness is telling us, that we're not just some kind of solid being. One author that I read that I really liked, he said rather the skanda means like a pile. So the 5 piles, like piles of things that make up our being. And this author said they proposed another way rather than thinking of it as piles, like piles of form and piles of sensation and feeling, that it's like when I was a child, these encyclopedias that had plastic sheets in them were really common. So you have like a human body, and there would be one sheet which would be bones, and then you'd lay the next sheet over, and it would be like the circulatory system, and then you'd lay another system over, and it would be the muscles, and you'd lay another, and it would be the skin, and another would be like hair and those kinds of things. So you could peel back the layer, but all of the layers had to interact with each other dynamically for there to be a body. This is the way that the skandhas work. They're not just like separate piles. They're completely interwoven with each other. And
Mm-hmm. If there is no self, what is belonging? And who is the one that wants to belong?
So the teaching of no self here does not mean that there is no being present. It just means that that being is not a permanently abiding being, like an independent, isolated being. That actually all beings are profoundly mutual, and we're profoundly intertwined. And so that yearning to belong is the expression of our intrinsic condition. Our intrinsic condition is non-isolation. And yet we buy into isolation again and again. We think that I am a being independent of other beings, independent of phenomena, independent of the world. I'm walking through the world, but it's me in a world, rather than a me that is completely of the world, a full expression of the world through this being. And so that yearning to belong, which is responded to in the foundational teachings of refuge in the Sangha, is our deep yearning to express our non-isolated self, which is our central, the center to our heart. It doesn't mean that we never need to be or never should be alone. In fact, aloneness is one of the very profound ways to explore our mutuality. but it is the way that we walk forward together, even though we're not always together.
Hey, Joe.
Hi.
In our practice, we sit and we chant, we study the sutras, and I wonder in all this, what is the role of samu, of work?
No, when we study a sutra, like when we read it, it's very easy for it to become flat. Like it's a two-dimensional receiving of the teaching. When we engage samu or work, we take what can appear two-dimensional, and it's one of the ways that it becomes three-dimensional. Three-dimensional with the dynamic interaction that the force of my being is touching other phenomena that are also touching me back. And I'm both affecting and being affected through that encounter. So what can look two-dimensional now becomes three-dimensional, and it becomes dynamic. There's other ways that can happen, but samu is primary to our tradition. This was not true of the oldest parts of our tradition. Renunciates, on the renunciate side, renunciates were not supposed to work at all. That was kind of the agreement. Renunciates don't work, and non-renunciates work, and they support the renunciates as well as other things. They have a lot of things to do, but that's one of the things that they do. And when our tradition came into China, that shifted for the renunciates. There became a strong focus on work as being part of the spiritual path. And the life of the renunciates changed quite a bit. We've now received that as not about renunciates or not renunciates, but that deep appreciation for why work is also Dharma was cultivated in that part of our history. And so we now can benefit from the strong energy that was brought in for appreciation for labor. And in labor, here I'm using that word purposefully. I don't mean work in any kind of theoretical way or abstract way. I mean the labor. Now that labor may be the labor of words, or it may be the labor of material like wood or fiber or clay. It may be the material of electrons in wires and keyboards, but it's the labor in which our lifting and shifting and pushing is met by the world. And when we can feel the place where we are being done as much as we are doing, that is a great spaciousness and a great joy in our life. And when we get tired from that kind of labor, we can rest very simply. And it's a joy to be tired when we find the spaciousness of that place, or that, it's not even a place, that meeting, when that meeting is true.
Ejo,
Hi.
when working with my reactions to life, I feel certain things that I place mentally as inside of me, and it's always a question about how do I determine whether that thing I feel inside of me is more a reflection of me and my story, or more a reflection of the external thing that I'm dealing with in life.
Yeah.
Do you have any like words to guide me when that kind of desire to know comes up?
Yeah. So the desire to know will oftentimes lead to cleaving the inside and outside from each other and trying to locate things in one place or the other. So when we feel that desire, one way to work with it is to reflect on that cleaving and feel for the place where I'm producing an outside and an inside that are cut off from each other, and then to see if I can see through that barrier. Whatever is inside is also outside, and whatever is outside is also inside. It always works that way. What it doesn't mean is the shape of it outside will look exactly the same inside, and what's inside will look exactly the same outside to my normal eye. And so when I feel for the place that the part that's inside, I just don't want to see outside, I rather take care of it inside, we get trapped, and vice versa. So if I speak for myself, for example, one of the places these days that I find that very strongly in my psyche is that a thick mixture of sorrow and rage for what we're doing. And what I mean by that is the many brutalities of humanity feel so raw to me right now, and I can feel it in my body, in my belly, in my heart, in my soul, in this deeply painful way. And I know there's stuff going on out there, but I prefer to just solve the problem in here. That actually serves my desire to protect myself. Because as I see that which is moving here is very clearly out there, the question of how do I live my life in a way that is responding to that is a very challenging question. So if I could just solve it inside, I don't have to ask that question, or I don't have to take it overly seriously. So when I feel that way, I try to look through that and say, what am I backing up from? Not that I think I'm the hero that's going to save the world. That's not the point. But the point is, for me to live authentically, I have to be willing to see the depths of that pain in the world and then step forward to meet it. And I have to ask the question, am I doing that? And almost always the answer will be no. I hope to be doing it. I do it sometimes. But am I stepping forward in the full measure? I have more work to do. And I'd prefer to be perfect. Yeah, so that's, for me, that's one of the places that happens. So, and it can be many varieties of that. But just looking for the way that keeping it inside kind of lets me off the hook, or keeps me from having to look at this other side of it, is a help in trying to see through and to see the balance.
Joe?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. What of personal expression and experience in the face of the ungraspable?
Could you say that one more time?
Yeah. What of like personal expression and experience in the face of the ungraspable?
They're just that. They're personal experience and expression. The issue is not that personal expression or personal experience is a problem. It's just that we're addicted to them as being the entirety. That's why they become a diversion. So last week in the Te show, I was saying, no, don't just chomp the next experience, the next experience, the next experience, the next experience. We're addicted to it. We're addicted to, let me grab onto the next thing, let me grab onto the next thing. These precious, precious jewels of phenomena. And we kind of throw them in our basket that's just leaking all over the place. But we're throwing them in there because that's all we know what to do. It makes us feel secure to think, oh, I have another experience, I have another experience, I have another experience. The whole time we're anxious because we know it's leaking out everywhere. We know we can't hold on to it, right? But we do that a moment after moment after moment after moment. And so the experience is not a problem. It's the way that we treat experience. We treat it as something to be consumed rather than something which is telling us totally about myself. Not something I'm just going to put in me, but something which is already reflecting me completely. So in our practice, we should feel that way in which we're consuming experience a moment after moment after moment. That's important to feel that, to get a sense of that mind of grasping and consuming. And then as we're going for the next thing, as we're clamping down on it, each time we have another opportunity, we have another option. And that's that option of immediate reflection. So we study the delusion, we become deeply intimate with it, because that's also the place in which the direct illumination can happen. And expression is much the same way. Experience we tend to talk about as being the passive side, where I'm receiving something from the world, but in the case of expression, I'm putting something out in the world. But it's really the same thing, just the two directions of the same activity.
Andrew? In your experience, what are some of the near enemies of coursing in prajna?
So in this case, a near enemy means something that looks like prajna to us, or feels like it, but actually is not skillful. Right? Is that the way you're using?
Or you might, an idea that you might start hanging out somewhere and cultivating some kind of energetic patterns that feel, you're like, oh, I'm nailing it, but actually you're a little bit south, a little bit east, and
So one of them is the sweetness of being held by the mother of non-differentiation. To be held by the earth and to melt into her is sublime. And it's easy, the thing that's tricky about it is we grasp it without knowing the grasping, because we're melting into the sweetness of being together, all being one thing. But that insistence on the all being one thing is a mega grasping. It's a grasping that we can't conceive of, because we've made the whole world about the absorption of our self. And the whole world being an absorption of ourself, it's like a sweet poison, and we die because there's no standing up. There's no individual. There's no me. There's no aloneness. Right? And that's equally as important as the dissolving. You know? So we do the yoga of this in a prostration. We go down, and as we go down and we put our hands out, it's like, you just feel like you're disappearing into the earth. If you watch some of these very old masters, when they bow, you'll hear many people report that they think they saw them disappear. Their bodies their intention is so complete, release into the earth, that sometimes their visual quality will disappear for people who are in the vicinity. They won't see them anymore. All right, so that is true, but it becomes a hindrance if there also isn't a standing up. Right? So sometimes prajna, we will make a story like it's me disappearing, and that can be a near enemy. So that's kind of more like one flavor. But then in a general sense, anytime you think you nailed it, you haven't. That's all very cliche to say, but it's really true. Anytime you're self-reflecting to yourself that, oh yeah, this is it, it just isn't. You're already set into objectifying your experience type of situation. So that's no reason to whip yourself, right? But it's also no reason to tell yourself in the next moment, I'm really nailing it. So I think the most appropriate response is to a little chuckle, you know? Like when you're like, oh yeah, oh man, I'm good. And then it's like, oh, you know, and that there's a deep humility that can come from that. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be looking for the way forward. It's just that the looking for the right way is not the affirmation of that right way is not going to come to us as a feeling of our own completeness. Right? Dogen Zenji said, when you are far from the way, it will feel as if there is something complete. When you are near to the way, it will feel as if something is missing. And while this is a really hard truth, it's what allows us to continue practicing and what allows us to continue practicing together. Once the completeness arrives, practice stops and our togetherness disappears.
Riffing on that, off that a bit, one of my favorite quotes from Dogen Zenji has been, it's in the Zui Monkey somewhere, and he talks about our task is to learn the scenery of the way.
Yeah.
In that experience, and you're finding yourself, there is some kind of a reflection on even once you're like, oh, I nailed it, and now you're like, oh, now I definitely haven't nailed it.
Yeah.
Is there a sense that you are, at that point, it feels like such a crucial juncture, probably for everyone's heart.
Yeah.
In a moment where like, aha, far from the way.
Yeah.
And now there's a slight lip of my experience in my heart. Now what to do, to not do.
Yeah.
So is there a place where you are having some kind of that feedback, and now you're putting what might be considered maybe this is my question. Are you returning to something that feels kind of more like a universal practice, or something that is reflecting more of the positionality of your heart?
If by universal you mean objective or independently existing, is that what you mean?
Maybe, but I guess maybe more of the quality might be like, aha, I've differed, I've become far from. Oh man, I'm kind of answering my own question. It is I find we're always talking about the harmony of the difference and sameness,
Right.
And maybe that's one way to talk about the heart of the way itself, is that at every moment there is a difference and there is a sameness, and I'm finding myself in a place of calibrating where my heart is and being like, aha, now this kind of practicing is there,
Right.
And it's over here, aha, this is needed,
Right.
And it can feel a little ping-pongy at times, and I'm wondering if I feel like I'm missing more of a quality of now just kind of something more like throwing yourself on the floor of surrender.
Yeah. So this would be the big thing, is that the throwing yourself on the floor of surrender does not mean you won't show up.
Yeah.
It actually means the opposite. When we set the sameness and the difference against each other, then the sameness is non-differentiation, disappearing. And the difference is differentiation and appearing. But these are not things we can see. We can't see non-differentiation, and we can't see differentiation. What we see is differentiation. What can be seen is differentiation. And the total meeting of difference is sameness. And in this way, they are not opposed to each other. They are the same activity. So when you throw yourself into the shower, that total dynamic functioning of showering is present in that shower. That doesn't mean we need to make like a big deal out of it. In fact, it means we can just be very straightforward about it. And if there isn't a handle, and there isn't a spout, and some soap, and my body, and hopefully a curtain or something, the shower doesn't work. Right? It needs every component. But it is the total non-isolation of all of those things which allows the dynamic activity to be, for all of those beings, all of those things to not be separate at all. So this is why, Samu is so important. But it's also why Zazen is so important. We sit totally by ourselves. The very famous comment of Uchiyama Roshi, he say, the self sits the self by the self. The thing here, though, is it's the self that has no other. It's not the self that stands against the other. It's the self that has no other. And so the total sitting of self is the sitting of all beings. The together is extra. We don't sit together with all beings. We sit as all beings. And this is the kind of the very fine point. Yeah, but I've already said too much.
Me too.
Hey, Joe. Last week during the Tesho, I was in the hall. Lots of interesting things were said. At the end of the talk, you got up and left, and I saw you turn into a gold and black dragon. What is the meaning of this?
The black dragon is my guide, and the gold dragon flies up into the sky. And I trust them both.
This coursing, it seems related to the no.
It feels related to the
No. No.
the no. Yeah. Language is tricky. I would take out the related. The coursing is no. And that's why the sutra, the most, from the very first time we read it, it seems so like, I wonder always a little bit, should we be reading this on Sundays, because it seems like so confusing. Just no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. But it's because that no is so important, even if it's enigmatic in the sutra. If we can just hear the no. But it's also tricky because our association with no may be it's likely to not be clean. How have we been told no in our life before? And how does that reverberate into our heart? What is the true and simple no of a Buddha? Becomes quite a koan for our own life. The golden sun is beginning to cross low in the sky, and the leaves brown. Please find your rest in this season. Not a negligent rest, not a rest to turn away from practice or to turn away from your life or the world, but the rest that is right at the center of experience, right at the center of your being and of each moment. As each phenomena invites you to step back, to know the uprightness of your consciousness, of your heart, of your body. Feel the truth there. Feel the ground. And feel your own gentle but profound strength.